At my daughter's engagement party, I was seated behind a curtain with the servers. The laughter and joy of the guests spilled into the space, but I was kept in the shadows. I watched them all from behind the veil of fabric, my heart sinking with each passing moment. Not a single person looked back, not even my own daughter, Rebecca. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, hoping for some acknowledgement, some sign of affection from my family. But instead, I was left to watch as the celebration unfolded without me. My mind raced as I sat there, wondering if I had somehow failed as a mother, or if I had simply outlived my welcome. Rebecca and Justin, her fiancé, danced under the lights, their smiles as bright as the chandeliers above them. The crowd cheered, clapping along to the rhythm of their joy. And I sat, invisible, my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my composure. I thought about the countless hours I had spent nurturing this family, the years of sacrifices and love, and yet here I was, forgotten. The sting of it was almost unbearable. As I watched them, I couldn't help but notice how much they had changed. They had moved on without me, and it seemed like there was no place left for me in their world. Rebecca had always been my little girl, the one I held close, the one who needed me. But now, she barely spared me a glance. A soft, cold breeze blew through the open door, ruffling the tablecloths as the servers hurried past, delivering trays of food I would never be allowed to taste. I wondered if they knew how much I longed for just a moment of connection, a single word of kindness. But no, I was just another face in the crowd, a backdrop to their perfect evening. The tension in my chest tightened with every passing second. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I should have been happy for my daughter, proud of her accomplishments, excited for her future. But instead, I felt lost, displaced, as though I was slowly fading from their lives. I thought back to the times when the house had been filled with laughter and love, when the family gathered around the table, when I was the one they turned to for comfort. But those days felt like distant memories now. I tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the sounds of the celebration, trying to lose myself in the music, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation. But it was impossible. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the weight of my isolation grew. I had been pushed to the margins, left behind like an afterthought, as if my presence no longer mattered. And yet, I kept my silence. I didn't let them see the pain in my eyes. I smiled when someone glanced in my direction, nodded when they spoke to me, but inside, I was breaking. I had taught my children to be strong, to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. But tonight, I felt like I was the one being left behind. As the evening wore on, Rebecca and Justin made their way around the room, greeting guests, posing for pictures, basking in the attention they so rightfully deserved. I stayed hidden behind the curtain, my place in this world shrinking by the second. How had I gotten here? How had I gone from being the center of her world to a forgotten figure in the background? I couldn't answer that, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. Not yet. I wasn't ready to give up just because they had forgotten me. Not yet. The rest of the evening felt like a blur. The party carried on around me, but I remained behind the curtain, hidden from view. I couldn't bring myself to leave, to face the cold reality that I no longer had a place at my daughter's celebration. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, they all seemed to echo in my ears, a cruel reminder of how I had been left out. I could hear Rebecca's voice, light and cheerful, as she mingled with her friends and family, her fiancé, Justin, never far from her side. They were happy, they were in love, and they were oblivious to the woman who had given everything for this family, who was now nothing more than a shadow in the background. I could feel the sting of tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. I had learned long ago to keep my emotions in check, to swallow the pain and hide it deep within. After all, that's what mothers do, don't they? They endure, they sacrifice, and they never let their children see how much it hurts. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to make sure everything ran smoothly. I had cooked the meals, cleaned the house, helped with the school projects, and supported them through every challenge. And yet, here I was, alone, pushed aside by the very people I had given everything for. I glanced over at the table where the guests were sitting, the smiles on their faces a sharp contrast to the emptiness I felt inside. They were all laughing, celebrating, and I was nothing more than an afterthought. I looked at Rebecca again, and for the first time, I noticed something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. She wasn't just distant, she was avoiding me. She had always been close to me, even as an adult. We used to have long talks, share secrets, and laugh about the little things. But now, it seemed like she couldn't stand to be in the same room with me. I wondered what had changed. Had I done something wrong? Had I somehow failed her? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. It didn't matter. What mattered now was that I had to keep my composure. I had to remain strong. The evening wore on, and the servers moved past me, offering plates of food that I wasn't allowed to touch. I watched as they served the guests, my stomach churning with hunger, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. The food seemed like a symbol of everything I had lost. I thought about the years I had spent raising Rebecca, how I had put her needs above my own, how I had made sure she had everything she wanted. And now, here she was, moving forward with her life, leaving me behind. I tried to keep my focus on the music, to lose myself in the rhythm of the party, but it was impossible. Every beat reminded me of how alone I felt, how forgotten I had become. I looked up at the chandelier above me, its crystals sparkling in the light, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my sadness. The truth was, I wasn't just left out of this party. I was being pushed out of their lives. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just a mistake or an oversight. It was deliberate. They didn't want me here. They didn't need me anymore. And that thought, more than anything, broke my heart. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky beneath me. I had to leave, but not yet. Not before I made sure I had some sort of answer. I needed to know what had happened. What had gone wrong? As I made my way toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of Rebecca and Justin sharing a quiet moment together, their faces full of happiness. I felt a pang of jealousy, but it wasn't the jealousy of a mother seeing her daughter happy. It was the jealousy of a woman who had been replaced, pushed aside for someone younger, someone new. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the chill brushing against my skin, and I finally allowed the tears to fall. I had spent so many years holding it all in, trying to be strong, trying to keep the family together, but tonight, I couldn't do it anymore. I let the tears come, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to grieve, not just for the loss of my husband, but for the loss of my place in my daughter's life. I wasn't just grieving for the family I had lost, but for the woman I used to be, the one who was needed, the one who had purpose. Now I was nothing, a shadow, a memory, fading into the background, and I couldn't tell if I would ever find my way back. The next morning, I woke up to an eerie quiet. The house was empty, the silence deafening. I had spent the night in my old room, the one I used to share with Edward, and now it felt like a ghost of what it once was. The bed felt too big for just me, the space too vast, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I pulled myself out of bed and wandered into the living room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. I sat in the old armchair that had once been my favorite spot, the one Edward and I used to sit in together, but today, it felt foreign. As I looked around, everything seemed too perfect, too pristine. It was as though the house was trying to tell me that nothing had changed, that life was still as it had been when Edward was here. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. The change was undeniable. The family I had built, the life I had carefully crafted over the years, was slowly slipping through my fingers. I had always been the glue that held us together. I was the one who organized the holidays, who cooked the meals, who kept the house running smoothly. I had been the pillar of strength for Rebecca, for Edward, for everyone. But now, I was invisible. It wasn't just last night that had hurt. It was the culmination of years of little moments, of subtle slights, and unspoken resentments. I had never been the type to raise my voice, to demand attention. I had always been content to stand in the background, to support those I loved, even when it meant sacrificing my own happiness. But now, it seemed like my sacrifices had been in vain. I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca was pushing me away, and it hurt more than I was willing to admit. It wasn't just the seating arrangement at the party, though that had been the final straw. It was the way she had avoided my gaze, the way she no longer turned to me for comfort or advice. I had watched her grow up, watched her go through all the stages of life, and now, she was a stranger. A part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had always put family first, told me to wait, to be patient, to give her time. After all, she was just starting her life with Justin, and maybe she needed space. But as I sat there in the living room, I realized that I could no longer wait. I had given so much of myself for so long, and now I had to take a stand. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I knew deep down that it wasn't. I stood up from the chair and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The world outside was moving on, and I was stuck here, in this house that no longer felt like home. I thought about the times when Rebecca was a little girl, how she used to run into my arms after school, how she would tell me everything, even the smallest details of her day. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. I had always prided myself on being a good mother, on doing everything I could for my children. But now, I wasn't sure if that had been enough. I thought about what Rebecca had said at the engagement party, how she had introduced Justin to everyone with such pride. She had barely acknowledged me, as if I was just another guest at the event. It stung more than I cared to admit. But what hurt even more was the realization that she was no longer the daughter I had once known. She had changed, and so had I. I had always thought that family would be there for me when I needed them, that no matter what, I would always have a place in their hearts. But now I wasn't so sure. As I turned away from the window, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. I looked older, more worn than I had a few years ago. The lines on my face seemed deeper, the weight of the years heavier. But I wasn't ready to fade into the background. Not yet. I wasn't ready to let go of the family I had built, the family I had fought so hard for. I wasn't ready to be forgotten. It was time to take control of my own story, to stop being the one who always kept the peace, and started being the one who stood up for herself. As I made my way to the kitchen to start the day, I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest. I wasn't going to let this go. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to sit in the shadows anymore. The days following the engagement party felt like a slow unraveling. I went through the motions, performing my duties as I always had, but everything seemed different now. The house, once filled with the noise of family, now felt too quiet, too still. I had spent years making sure everything ran smoothly, ensuring the holidays were perfect, that the meals were prepared with care, that the house was a warm and welcoming place for everyone. But now, it seemed like no one cared about the effort anymore. Rebecca, my daughter, had always been my pride. I had given so much of myself for her, always trying to make her life better, always there when she needed me. But now, I was beginning to wonder if it had been worth it. I sat at the kitchen table one afternoon, absent-mindedly stirring my coffee. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the worn tablecloth, but I couldn't shake the cold feeling inside me. I looked out at the garden, where Edward and I had once spent hours planting flowers, tending to the vegetable patch, and just enjoying each other's company. The garden felt different now, just like everything else. It was a place filled with memories, but now those memories only brought pain. I wondered if Rebecca ever thought about the sacrifices I had made for her, the years I had spent putting her needs before my own. Did she even remember the times I had stayed up late, nursing her through a fever, or the days I had spent helping her with school projects? I didn't think she did. All of that seemed to have been erased, replaced with her new life with Justin. She had her own family now, her own future, and I was no longer a part of it. The thought stung more than I expected. But what hurt even more was the realization that I was no longer needed. I had spent so much time being the one who held everything together, the one who kept the peace, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly. And now, I was left in the background, a forgotten figure in a family I had built. As the days passed, I began to notice more and more how distant Rebecca had become. She would call, but the conversations felt forced, like we were both just going through the motions. She would talk about the wedding plans, about Justin, about her life, but she never asked about mine. She never seemed to care. I tried to tell myself that maybe she was just busy, that things would settle down after the wedding. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something had changed. Something I couldn't put my finger on. It wasn't just the wedding, or her new fiancé, or even the engagement party. It was everything. Rebecca had moved on, and I was no longer a part of her life in the way I once had been. I couldn't help but feel that I had been replaced, that my place in her heart had been taken by someone else. And it wasn't just Rebecca. The entire family had distanced themselves. Edward's death had left a void, and I had tried to fill it, tried to keep the family together, but it seemed like they didn't need me anymore. I walked around the house, touching the things Edward and I had once shared. The old pictures on the walls, the books we had read together, the chair where he used to sit. Each item was a reminder of what I had lost. What we had lost. I sat down in the living room, feeling the weight of everything on my shoulders. I hadn't realized how much I had given up until now, how much of myself I had sacrificed for the sake of my family. And yet, here I was, forgotten, left behind. I couldn't stop the tears from falling as I sat there, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I had always been the strong one, the one who kept everything together, but now, I felt like I was crumbling. I had given everything for this family, and now, I was nothing more than a distant memory. I stood up, wiping the tears from my face. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't keep living in the past, clinging to memories that only brought pain. I had to find a way to move forward, to reclaim my life. I wasn't ready to fade into the background, to be forgotten. I was still here, and I still had a voice. It was time to use it. I went to the kitchen and started preparing a simple meal, the way I always had. The sound of the knife chopping vegetables, the sizzle of the pan, it was comforting, familiar. But as I cooked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The family I had once known was no longer there, and I didn't know how to get it back. I didn't know if I ever would. The following days felt like an uphill battle. I went about my life, but everything was weighed down with an unspoken tension, an invisible barrier that seemed to separate me from the rest of the world. The house that had once been full of life, of laughter and shared moments, now seemed hollow, empty, and cold. I would wake up in the morning, brew my coffee, and sit in the kitchen, staring out the window at the garden. It used to bring me peace, the simple act of watching the flowers bloom, of tending to the plants Edward and I had put so much love into. But now, it was just another reminder of what I had lost. The flowers seemed to mock me with their vibrant colors, a stark contrast to the grayness that had settled in my heart. I had spent so many years nurturing my family, putting their needs above mine, believing that the love and care I gave would be returned when the time came. But now, I was questioning everything. Rebecca, my daughter, had become a stranger to me. She was no longer the little girl I had once held so close, the girl who had needed me. Now, it felt like she didn't even see me. It wasn't just the wedding or the engagement party or the distance that had grown between us. It was something deeper, something that had been building over time, slowly and quietly, like a crack in a foundation that you don't notice until the whole thing starts to crumble. I had always prided myself on being a good mother, on doing everything I could for my children. But now, it felt like all of that had been for nothing. I could see it in the way Rebecca avoided my gaze, in the way she only called when it was necessary, and in the way she never asked how I was doing. It was like I was just an afterthought in her life. And that hurt more than I was willing to admit. I spent hours reflecting on the past, trying to pinpoint when things had started to change. Had it been when Edward passed away? No, it couldn't have been. I had always been there for her, even in his absence. So when had it happened? I thought back to the times when we would sit together, when I would help her with school projects, or listen to her talk about her friends. She used to come to me for advice, for comfort, for reassurance. But now, she seemed to turn away from me at every turn. I had tried to reach out, tried to talk to her, but every conversation felt like a struggle. The distance between us was palpable, like a thick wall that I couldn't break through. I thought about the moments when I had been there for her, when I had stayed up all night with her, when I had listened to her tears, when I had put everything aside to be there. But where was she when I needed her? She was off with Justin, planning their future, building their life together, and I was left to pick up the pieces of mine. It wasn't that I didn't want her to be happy. I did. I wanted nothing more than for her to find love and live a fulfilled life. But in doing so, she had left me behind. She had moved on, and I was stuck in the past. The thought of it made my chest tighten. I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for a call, for a visit, for any sign that I still mattered. I had to do something. But what? What could I do when everything I had worked for, everything I had given, had led to this? I stood up from the kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly. I had to face the truth. I had to stop pretending that everything was fine. I wasn't fine, and I wasn't going to keep pretending to be. I walked to the living room and sat in my favorite chair, the one I had shared with Edward. The silence in the house was deafening, and I couldn't escape it. I thought about the years we had spent here, the plans we had made, the dreams we had shared. But now, those dreams felt so far away, like distant memories that I couldn't grasp. I had spent so many years making sure everything was perfect for everyone else. Now, I had to focus on myself. I had to find my own path forward, even if it meant walking away from the family I had built. It wasn't easy. The thought of being alone, of losing what little connection I had left, was terrifying. But the fear of staying in this stagnant place, of continuing to be invisible to the people I had loved, was worse. It was time to make a change. I didn't know what that change would look like or how I would go about it, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep being the one who was left behind. I wasn't ready to fade away. Not yet. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything. I kept thinking about the house, about my life, about Rebecca. I had always believed that family was the most important thing, that no matter what happened, we would always stick together. But now, as I walked through the halls of this house, everything felt hollow. The memories I had cherished were now fading, replaced by a cold emptiness. I sat down at the kitchen table again, my hands resting on the surface as I stared out the window. The garden was still there, but it didn't seem to bring me comfort anymore. I could no longer find peace in the things I once loved. My thoughts kept returning to the same question. How had things gone so wrong? What had happened to the bond one shared with Rebecca? She used to be my little girl, my confidant, the one person I could always rely on. But now, it felt like I had been cast aside, like I was no longer needed. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had moved on without me, and it hurt more than I could express. I had given so much of myself for her, sacrificed my time, my energy, my dreams. And now, she was building a life with Justin, leaving me behind in the process. I thought back to the times when we had shared moments of joy, when I had been there for her through every milestone. Those were the times I had lived for. But now, those moments seemed so far away, as if they belonged to someone else. I had spent so many years as a mother, so many years making sure everyone around me was happy, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had always put others first, always made sure their needs were met before my own. But now, I had nothing left to give, and it was starting to feel like they didn't want anything from me anyway. The silence in the house was unbearable. I tried to distract myself with household chores, but nothing could fill the void. I would clean the kitchen, organize the living room, tend to the plants in the garden, but it all felt meaningless. I was going through the motions, but I wasn't really living. It wasn't just the absence of Rebecca that hurt. It was the absence of purpose. I had spent so many years dedicated to my family, but now, I was no longer sure what my role was. I was just here. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay. I needed something more. I needed to find a way to reclaim my life, to rediscover who I was outside of being a mother and a wife. I had spent so many years living for others, but now it was time to start living for myself. But where did I even begin? How did I find my way back to the woman I once was? I didn't know the answers, but I knew that I couldn't stay in this place forever. I couldn't keep letting myself be invisible, pushed to the sidelines. I had to take control of my life again. As I sat there in the kitchen, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I realized that I had spent too long allowing myself to be a doormat, allowing others to walk all over me. I had to change. I had to find my voice, my strength, my sense of self-worth. I couldn't keep waiting for Rebecca to notice me. I couldn't keep hoping that things would go back to the way they were. I had to make the change myself. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to memories that no longer served me. I had to move forward, even if it meant letting go of the family I had spent so many years trying to hold together. I stood up from the table, my mind racing with the possibilities. There was so much I needed to do, so much I needed to figure out. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a sense of purpose again. I didn't know where this new journey would take me, but I was ready to take the first step. It was time to start living for myself. The days that followed were filled with a quiet determination. I started to change my routine, small things at first, just little adjustments to remind myself that I was still here, that I still mattered. I began to spend more time outside, tending to the garden, something I hadn't done in years. The flowers that Edward and I had planted together, the ones I had watched bloom season after season, felt like the only part of the house that still had life in it. Each plant I cared for seemed to give me a sense of purpose, a small victory in a world that had started to feel so empty. But even as I found solace in the garden, the weight of my new reality lingered. I still couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca had pulled away from me. It wasn't just the engagement party or the way she had barely looked at me. It was the little things, the phone calls that were fewer and farther between, the times I had tried to reach out and gotten no response. I couldn't understand it. I had done everything for her, everything a mother could. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, and my heart to make sure she had everything she needed. But somewhere along the way, I had become invisible. It wasn't just the lack of attention that hurt. It was the realization that I had given up so much of myself, and now I was left with nothing. But I couldn't dwell on it forever. As much as it hurt, I knew I had to start focusing on me. I had spent too many years putting everyone else first, losing sight of who I was in the process. It was time to rediscover myself, to find the woman I used to be before I became just a caretaker, a background figure in everyone else's life. It was easier said than done, of course. The memories of my family, of Rebecca, kept creeping back, and the pain was still there, just beneath the surface. I still loved her, of course, and I still wanted the best for her. But I couldn't keep letting her actions, or her silence, dictate my happiness. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. The world outside seemed so busy, so full of life, while I felt like I was standing still. The stillness around me made the emptiness inside feel even more pronounced. I had spent so many years caring for everyone else, but now, I had no one to care for me. I didn't have anyone to talk to share my thoughts and feelings with. The silence felt suffocating. But as I sat there, something shifted. I realized that I couldn't wait for someone else to fill the void. I had to fill it myself. I had to learn how to be content on my own, to find happiness in the simple things. I didn't need Rebecca to come to my rescue. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I could do this on my own. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew it would take time, but I was finally ready to take the first step. I stood up from the porch and walked back inside. The house still felt empty, but it didn't matter. I had taken control. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. It wasn't the same kind of hope I had once had. The hope that everything would return to the way it was, that things would go back to normal. No, this was different. This was the hope that I could create a new normal, that I could build a life for myself, one where I wasn't defined by my role as a mother or a wife. It was scary, though. The thought of being alone, of truly being on my own, was terrifying. But as I stood there in the quiet house, I knew that I couldn't let fear control me anymore. I couldn't let it hold me back from moving forward. I had spent so much of my life looking after others, waiting for them to acknowledge me, to appreciate me. But now, I was going to do it for myself. I wasn't sure what the future held, or how things would turn out, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to let the years of sacrifice and love go unnoticed. I was going to make my mark, even if it was just for me. It had been a few weeks since I decided to take control of my life, but even as I started to rebuild, the ache of rejection from my daughter, Rebecca, remained. I had made small changes, started to do things for myself, but there were still moments when the silence of the house would overwhelm me, and the thoughts of what I had lost crept in, uninvited. I had filled my days with gardening and trying to find solace in the routine of my life, but there were still moments of emptiness, of wishing things had turned out differently. I kept asking myself, how could I fix this? How could I fix my relationship with Rebecca? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe it wasn't just up to me. Maybe Rebecca needed to come to terms with her own choices, just as I needed to come to terms with mine. I had spent my life prioritizing everyone else's happiness and well-being over my own. But now, I had to prioritize myself. It wasn't selfish, it was necessary. As I sat at the kitchen table one morning, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of me, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm wash over me. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It was the calm that comes with accepting things as they are, not as you want them to be. I had always lived my life by trying to make everything perfect, trying to control everything. But that approach had only left me feeling like I was losing my grip. And now, I was learning to let go. I realized that I had spent so much of my time worrying about Rebecca, about the family, and how they saw me, that I had forgotten to live for myself. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't force Rebecca to see things from my perspective. But I could change how I responded to it. I could stop waiting for her to come to me and start moving forward on my own terms. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but I was ready to embrace this new chapter of my life. I stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the garden once again. It was spring now, and the flowers were in full bloom. The once empty garden was now full of life, a reflection of the changes I was trying to make within myself. I had spent so many years nurturing others, and now I was learning to nurture myself. It felt like a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. As I stood there, I thought about the future. I didn't know what it held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid to be on my own, to carve out a new life for myself. It felt liberating. I had spent too many years letting my identity be defined by others, by my role as a wife, as a mother, as someone who always had to be strong for everyone else. But now, I realized that I could define who I was, regardless of what anyone else thought. I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to be the one who always held everything together. I could just be me, and that was enough. As I continued to stand there, watching the flowers sway in the breeze, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't need Rebecca to understand everything right now. I didn't need her approval. I needed to focus on myself and build the life I deserved. It wasn't about giving up on her or the family. It was about finding my own peace. I had been so focused on what I had lost that I hadn't realized what I still had. I had my health. I had my home. And most importantly, I had myself. And that was something no one could take away from me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world lift off my shoulders, even if just for a moment. I was ready for the next step. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew it was a step toward something better, a step toward reclaiming my life. I wasn't ready to fade away. Not yet. It had been months since I decided to take control of my own life, and though there were still days of doubt, the weight of the past seemed lighter now. I had found a rhythm, a sense of calm in the quiet moments I once feared. The house, which had felt like a prison of silence, now felt like a sanctuary of sorts, a place I had made my own. The garden, still in full bloom, had become my haven, a reflection of the new life I was cultivating for myself. Each morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. I no longer lingered in bed, wondering if things would change. Instead, I spent my days filling them with activities that made me feel alive, whether it was tending to the garden, reading a book, or taking long walks through the neighborhood. There were times when I thought about Rebecca, when the pang of missing her hit me hard. But those moments were fewer now. I had learned to embrace the idea that my happiness did not depend on anyone else, especially not on someone who was choosing not to be a part of my life. I still loved her, of course. That love hadn't changed, but I no longer waited for her to come back into my world. I had my own world now, one that was growing, one that was starting to feel whole again. One afternoon, as I was walking to the mailbox, I saw a familiar figure approaching from the end of the street. It was Rebecca. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. Should I turn and go back inside? Pretend I hadn't seen her? But then I realized I had nothing to fear anymore. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to retreat back into myself. I stood still, waiting for her to reach me. When she did, there was a long pause, the air thick with unspoken words. She looked at me, her face softening, and for the first time in months, I saw a hint of the daughter I once knew. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly, her voice unsure. I couldn't help but notice how much older she seemed. Her eyes were tired, like she had been carrying the weight of something she wasn't ready to share. "Hi, Rebecca," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. There was a silence between us, a silence that felt both heavy and necessary. For a moment, neither of us spoke, just standing there on the sidewalk, taking each other in. I could feel the distance between us, but it wasn't as painful as it had been. It wasn't as unbearable as it once was. "I've been thinking," she began, hesitating before continuing, "about everything. About what happened. About how things have been between us." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. My emotions were quiet now, not frantic, not desperate. I had spent so many years trying to fix things, trying to make everything right. But now, I just needed to listen. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've pushed you away. I don't really know why, but I think I was scared. I didn't know how to handle everything that was changing, and I guess I just shut you out." I felt a knot in my chest loosen. It wasn't the apology I had been waiting for, but it was something. It was a start. "I understand," I said, the words coming more easily than I expected. I know things haven't been easy, and I haven't been perfect either. But we both need to figure out how to move forward. I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I want to. I just don't know how to make it right. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years of distance between us. But I also felt something else, something that had been missing for so long. Hope. Hope that we could rebuild, that we could start over, even if it was one small step at a time. We don't have to figure everything out today, I said softly. But we can start. We can take it slow, and we'll see where it goes. She nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had raised. We didn't hug, but it didn't matter. The connection was there, quiet and fragile, but real. As she turned to leave, she glanced back at me. I'll call you, okay? She said. I smiled, a genuine smile, and nodded. I'll be here, I replied. As I watched her walk away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I had taken the first step. I had made room for the possibility of healing, of understanding, of rebuilding what had been broken. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I was. No longer afraid of what the future held. I was ready for whatever came next.